is Cold Start.
Now, car culture has changed a lot in the last 10 years. Even over the course of the last handful of years, there's been major shifts in regards to car culture, being a car person, and what all that really looks like. Now, of course, there's the variables of the cars themselves, right? As manufacturers come out with new models, the shifts towards full electric and things like that. But we're going to stay away from that conversation in regards to the cars and how new cars can change car culture. I want to talk about the people, and I want to talk about the shift in regards to maybe the overpopulation in regards to car people, the mainstream nature of car culture nowadays, and what sort of effects that can have on the community as a whole.
You know, it always makes me feel a little bit like that guy who was there first and is always trying to remind you about how they liked the thing back in the day, but now it's different and it's not the same. I think there's something to this, right? There's definitely been an evolution of what it means to be a car person, what you get out of that, what you put into that, how you affiliate with that. And it's not just social media. I mean, that definitely has an effect, but the way people kind of relate to cars is different now. And I think it is some of what you said earlier. It wasn't, right, about the kinds of cars, the nature of cars today, but it's definitely a different style of engagement by the people. There's got to be something behind that.
Yeah, I don't want us to sound like, oh yeah, we were back in the good old days, and I'm not even that old, and I can still think back of like, this used to be a lot different, and the way that we engaged with these things was a lot different. And I mean, I can only go as far back as like maybe like the 2010s of being in high school and finally getting my license and getting into cars and in a very real way, not just being a fan as a kid and looking through magazines and brochures and stuff like that. But back then, I remember in high school being a car guy, you were kind of an outsider. I remember I had a hot hatch, as the kids call them nowadays. So I had a Volkswagen GTI. That was my first car in high school.
Nice.
And people made fun of me. Like, I actually got made fun of like, oh yeah, you drive a Prius, because they didn't think that a hatchback could be anything else other than a Prius. And I was like, no, like it's cool, it's fun. And like people wouldn't hear about it. And it was just such an odd thing of when I went through school to find other people that were into cars was very challenging. You were looked at as that weird kid that was like, oh, you're just really obsessed with cars, and kind of dismissed for the most part.
I think kids find a way to dismiss just about anything, whether it's cool or not. I would have thought about that GTI thing. People would have said, are you driving a VW Rabbit? And then the totally stereotypical thing about it that people wouldn't say today is like, isn't that a girl's car?
Well, they didn't even know anything. That's the thing, is like they only knew like Prius. Prius looks like that. That kind of looks like a Prius. Like they didn't even have enough knowledge to be like, oh, that's based off of the Volkswagen Rabbit.
Yeah, base knowledge of car equals that must be a Prius because it looks like a hatchback or something like that. But yeah, I think I agree. There was this period when car culture was sort of a little bit more limited. It didn't have as broad of an appeal. It was sort of relegated to those, grease monkeys and track rats. And there was these names that we had for people who were really big nerds about cars, the same way we have names for people who are really big about comic books or other things that we would affiliate a very small niche group with, being really into a particular activity.
Yeah, I mean, like being nerdy about cars was very much a thing. And like the term nerd is kind of like outsider, different, weird. And that was definitely the feeling that I had back then in high school. Was like, oh, I'm just different. I don't relate to a lot of people. I only really relate to car people, and they were kind of few and far between. Now, in regards to the community, back then, I think that served in its benefit in a way, not feeling like an outsider, right? No one wants to feel like that. But once you got or found that community, the wholesomeness and the purity of the community itself was very, very strong back in those days. And I think it was because there was a little bit of that barrier to entry of like, you have to be weird enough or outside the norm enough to be a part of this. But then the people that actually cared were the ones that were inside of that, and they wanted to protect and curate a really, really good car community.
Yeah, I'll differ with something you said there, though. I think the idea that nobody wants to be an outsider is not totally right. People want to be an outsider with the other insiders, right? And I think that's what this world used to be, was you could use the language, the vocabulary, like the jargon of mechanics and car enthusiasts and motorsports with other people who also spoke that same language. Yep. So you had this sort of almost like secret language or code that you had amongst yourselves, and those people were seen as outsiders, but among that group of people you had this tight-knit cohort of, oh, I get it. Do you get it? Yeah, you get it. You must have sort of the same feeling about this thing that we're passionate about. So come on and join our club of other misfits.
Right, 100%. And also talking about social media back in that day too. So the 2010s, that's kind of when everything started to ramp up of Instagram, Facebook, all that sort of stuff in regards to social media.
Right.
And I remember getting into that and being into cars and having my first car and wanting to share photos and this, that, the other. And back then, the community was thriving. And like you're talking about, of like being able to connect with people on the internet over this shared passion, those connections felt so much more substantial.
Yeah.
And being able to make that connection immediately. And now obviously as we have progressed and social media has progressed as well, I don't feel that substance anymore of being able to connect with people. It almost seems like this shift into nowadays in regards to car culture is more about competition rather than community.
Yeah, has it progressed or has it really regressed in a way? If we look way back, I'd say the first examples of car culture that I could think about are probably back in the 1950s, right? Yeah, there was car culture before that, but it wasn't widely known. There wasn't this sort of mass media sort of perpetuating out there. And I think about the old street racing, kind of James Dean on the back road, people doing stuff that was edgy, and that was affiliated with, you know, young kids coming up, sort of a little bit of like an edgy point of view, the kinds of people who are becoming popular in mainstream culture, you know, where the leather jacket wearing, dirt under the fingernails, having people doing things that seemed like a little outside the norm. And we're out there having a good time doing it. And over time, that changed because of other factors, right? Like in the 70s, the gas crisis, right? Everything got really expensive and fewer people were getting into cars just because it wasn't as accessible to people at that time. And there's been this ebbing and flowing of it. And I think social media did exactly what you said. It started to illuminate the fact that there were these groups of people with these sort of interest areas, and they would get together as a group and sort of geek out about them. And then every once in a while, those things would sort of break out. And I think the same way it follows with the sort of narrowness of how information was communicated previously, right? Old narrow media channels, magazines and print ads and things that are harder to get your hands on. They weren't, you know, delivered right to you. You had to go and seek them out to find that information.
It took energy to get involved in a community.
Absolutely, right? You weren't just part of the group by showing up. You had to figure out how to get there, what that group was, how to enter it, how to meet people into it. So it required a lot more energy and effort. In the same way that when social media started out, it did have that promise of connecting people with like interests across these interest groups from all around the world. And over time, that sort of watered everything down to the point where now we hear noise from other people that we're not even interested in just because we've all been connected to such a hyper extent.
And going off of this kind of like history, I agree with you that car culture has come and gone and come back. Like even in the early 2000s, prior to social media, you had this whole underground scene, right? The tuners, the people that were modifying their cars.
Fast and the Furious.
And that blew up right there. I mean, think about that transition into Hollywood and how Hollywood then shone the light on this underground scene. And you look at like builds and the fashion that went with like the early 2000s tuner scene. You look at these individuals and you're like, oh yeah, this was like outcast, alt culture, like 100%.
Oh yeah.
And so to Hollywoodize that and kind of like shine a light on this very interesting that was happening, I think that was like the first catalyst that started to get into and popularizing modifying cars.
For sure, and bringing that from other cultures.
Yeah, and so I think that there was this huge surgence that happened with styling cars, modifying them, stancing them, whatever you want to call it. I mean, there's so many different subcategories. We're not going to get into that in this episode. But there was that huge growth period that happened that I think was in like the 2010s. I think, you know, late 2000s, early 2010s was this decent growth period. Now, the community itself was still relatively small.
Right.
It was still relatively niche. Like, you kind of had to know how to get involved or how to get into it or develop that specific taste to really enjoy it.
Right.
And then kind of into those later 20-teens area, that's when things started to, I think, make an additional shift, and that growth really started to accelerate, and we saw this exponential interest getting into vehicles. And I would relate a lot of that to the social media side of it of
Right.
as more people are getting into cars, modifying more cars, stylizing cars in bigger and bigger ways, people are showing more and more interest of look at this crazy thing. And then that just compounded on itself. And where I think we are nowadays, now in 2025, which it's crazy to think that like the late 2010s were almost 10 years ago, I think at the moment, in regards to car culture, the growth of cars in general from a societal standpoint, in regards to its success and growth as a community, I think we're starting to see ourselves on the back end of the bell curve.
Yeah.
Which is kind of scary to think about.
It is. I mean, a lot of this has been driven by technology in ways that we can obviously talk about social media. That's a really obvious one. But there's some other things. I was thinking back to the video games that I would play when I was a kid, and car and racing video games, they were much more primitive, right? The technology just wasn't there to make a realistic looking version of a car or the handling characteristics. Certainly nothing as sophisticated as what we see with sim racing today with Assetto Corsa or iRacing. So it required a lot more imagination, right? You had to really be into this thing to put yourself in a place that didn't actually look like or feel like the activity that you were trying to emulate, right? Like being in a race car on an old 16-bit Nintendo or something like that, it didn't feel like you were actually racing a car, but it was a fun thing to do, and you can kind of imagine yourself in this vehicle. Now, fast forward to the point where being in a simulated vehicle has a lot to do with what it's like to be in an actual one. So we're making available to a lot more people this sort of experience of car capability, characteristics, the feeling that it might give you, and just exposure to them, right? The number of lobbies that we all sat in Forza and games like that, looking at all these different cars from around the world that maybe we never had exposure to before. That was another thing that sort of turned more people on to the fact that there's all these different kinds of cars and there's something to be experienced there that you don't even need to necessarily be in the car. You can just see this proxy of the car, be in the virtual version of that car to get a feeling of it. And I think that made it become more accessible to more people.
Yeah, and I think what you're covering is there are benefits to something becoming mainstream or over-popularized, right?
For sure.
The more attention that goes to a community or a thing, obviously the more money that gets thrown at it, which is excellent, right? We can reap the benefits as being a car enthusiast or into cars if that becomes a trendy thing that companies, major companies putting money into developing better games, better simulators. Out in the movies, there's more content or more media for us to consume because there's now a large enough audience for those companies to make money off of, or even shirts and swag and all this other sort of stuff that we can get into. But I think there's also a downside to something becoming overly popularized or mainstream. And as a car enthusiast myself, like seeing my community make major shifts in the last handful of years solely because so many people have got involved or interested in it. And I think there are some downsides to cover with that. Now, I think a way to tell, finger on the pulse, what is the health of the car community is looking at those car meets, the Cars and Coffee.
Yeah.
I think that's probably the lowest barrier to engage with the car community, other than obviously purchasing a car, but being a part of the car community, kind of baseline, you have a car.
Right.
But that's the easiest thing to go and do. Car meets, by and large, are free. And also, it's that community aspect. You're going out there in the real world, engaging with other car people. So we're not looking just solely at social media, how many posts there are, because that doesn't have that community aspect like we're talking about.
Right.
But like, what does the car community look like nowadays, and how have these car meets shifted in recent time? I think that's going to be the biggest telltale sign, looking at how is car culture being overly popularized and what are those effects. So if we look at within the last little bit, car meets, I think a handful of them have reached news channels. If you're a car person looking at Car and Driver, Jalopnik, whatever your online car news channel is, you've heard about some of these events that have been happening across the country and in Europe. And so these car meets, there's just too many people that are showing up to these events. And if you have a mass of people that come, there is going to be a percentage that is not going to hold true to keep that car community alive and well and do stupid stuff. And so the first one that I seen, and I used to be into like the stance culture and really liking low slammed cars, not too much camber, but like, modifying stuff. And to me,
Sure.
that was like the purest expression of car culture is these people would put time, money, and energy into these builds. And that was the coolest thing for me. And one of those shows when I was in high school that I really, really wanted to go to, it was called H2O. And it was in Ocean City, Maryland. So pretty cool town right there on the coast. And I remember watching YouTube videos of the after movies of these shows. And I was like, oh, it's so cool. And it was mainly Euro. So I was into European stance cars, the Euro style. And over the years, I saw in the late teens, these shows kind of changed their vibe. It used to be like, show up with your car, hang out with your buddies, cruise down the strip. To all of a sudden now there's a bunch of burnouts, donuts. The crowds became insane. It got to the point that, Ocean City had to just start ticketing cars like crazy, which then creates a little bit of conflict of Ocean City versus the stance guys. And it got to the point that H2O actually had to move out of Ocean City. They had to talk with the city. The city said, you're no longer welcome back. Please don't come back with your show. And H2O used to be, it was an organized show. It was an organized event. And then there was all the stuff that would happen around that. And so for me, I'm like, okay, H2O got killed off, essentially. It's dead. It's no longer what it used to be because too many people showed up. Too many people mistreated what the car community is really supposed to be about. Now let's transition over to Europe. So there's this other show called Wörthersee, another really cool location. It's in Austria. Same thing, stanced cars, stuff like that. And that show also got shut down by the municipality because of environmental concerns, too many vehicles, and the over-tourism of the area. Basically just saying that there's too many people. This can no longer exist. Now, the most famous one, this is the one I was referencing that you've probably seen out in the news waves, is Gatlinburg.
Yes.
So Gatlinburg, that's another famous slammed car, stance car show. So it's Slammed Enough is the ones that host that car show.
In Tennessee.
Yes, and that is a legitimate show. It's in a convention center. But once again, the attraction to all these people to come to these major events that have been popularized through social media and social channels and stuff like that, there's obviously a lot of other things that happen outside that event. And what happened in Gatlinburg, there was a big confrontation between some participants, people with stance cars, as well as the police force. There were so many people in this area that the police felt that they couldn't control the situation, and they actually announced that they were going to shut down the event before it actually happened.
We've seen this happen time and time again, right? Where too many people show up for a thing and they sort of ruin it for everybody. It's that phenomenon of this is why we can't have nice things.
Oh, 100%.
Right. It start out with this core group of people who are into their thing and they create an event or an experience or whatever it is for that group. And as it gets more and more popular, at some point there's a tipping point and it gets too popular. It gets too large for the venue. There's no or fewer controls on the requirements to participate in that event in the first place. There are no agreements that are required for you to ascribe by a set of guidelines or rules in order to participate at that thing. You just show up. And what happens over time is this, I think I can call it is like a tragedy of the commons, right?
Oh, yeah.
You didn't put anything in, so there's just this common area that you can take advantage of. It's like a city park. And if everybody can just go to the park and use it anytime they want and do anything that they want there, pretty soon it'll be overrun and not usable by anybody. And, never mind the discussion behind the scenes of who actually pays for that park and taxes and things. But
Yeah.
a car meet happening is generally a free thing that's made available to the people who know about it. And as more and more people become aware of these things and, again, want to sort of affiliate with them for the purposes of being able to show off pictures to their friends online, these things get ruined because people don't know how to behave or they don't know how to engage in this way in a way that's constructive, right? All they know is the shorthand of what they've seen is people ripping burnouts or pulling out of the parking lot their Mustang and, plowing into a tree. They think that's the level of what's acceptable or expected at these events. And the only way you're going to get visibility online on social media is to do something outrageous. So it only sort of engenders that behavior more and more. It influences people to do dumb things.
I was going to say, I think social media is kind of the biggest catalyst here of forcing people to want to do dumb stuff because I think we've all now seen pretty much everything we can see on the internet. So it's like if you want to stand out amongst the crowd now in car culture, you need to have negative 15 degrees of camber and the thing's banging against the pavement, or you're the one that's going to do the craziest burnout or donuts in an intersection that no one else would dream of. all things that is a race to the bottom to destroy the car community. And I would also say, in my terminology, as the kids would say, I think a lot of stuff in regards to cars is getting overhyped. There's just too many people in the room and watering down this overall community, and it's ruining these experiences. I've even seen some of the cars and coffees that happen down in Southern California, which are usually like the mecca for car culture, right? We all think about LA and how phenomenal Southern California car culture is, but they've just become overrun. If you can't even get in anymore. And now people are spilling out into the streets, once again trying to rip donuts, trying to show off, trying to get people's attention, rather than being there for the community aspect of just making connections, showing off your car, talking to other people, enjoying what we enjoy as car enthusiasts, which are the cars, not doing stupid stuff or trying to go famous on the internet.
There's a sense of, as things get more crowded, it sort of pushes out some of the really core fans. You see this happen with musical acts, with bands all the time where, there's like a hardcore group of people that are really into this band for a long time, and something happens where they get really popular, and now all those original fans have a hard time engaging with that band just because there's too much competition. It's this sort of festivalization, if you will, of these events, right? Where it used to be that there was this really cool exclusive event for people who are geeky enough to care about something like old air-cooled Porsches. So they put on this thing called Luftgekühlt, and it was a great event, and in and of itself, it was a beautiful thing, and it was well done and well handled, and the people doing it were enthusiasts. And then what happened? Over time, pictures and video from these events started to get out. And people saw how cool this was and how much they were sort of raising the stakes every year with these events they'd put on. And so more and more people wanted to show up to these events, not necessarily because they were hardcore enthusiasts of old air-cooled Porsches, but because it looked like a cool place to be. That was the new festival, right? We didn't have Coachella that week. We didn't have Lollapalooza or whatever else that you're into, that thing that you would go and glom onto. We had these car events that were happening on the same scale and getting the same level of publicity with, famous people, celebrities, influencers, whatever you have. And it's sort of watered down that experience for the core enthusiast who really wanted to go and nerd out with other car nerds about this really kind of niche type of car. And that sort of fell by the wayside to the selling of, hats and T-shirts and stuff.
Yeah, and I don't want to sound like the old head here of like, oh, the kids are ruining it. And back in my day, it used to be so sick and like things have changed and not for the better. I don't want to sound like that because, like, once again, I like the growth of car culture because it's been able to provide that there's a lot more to do, see, and be about in regards to cars. But this rant, I think, is warranted because there are things that are no longer existing in the car culture because of the mass of people and because of people's decisions. And it's the lowest common denominator that are making these poor decisions, not the actual car enthusiasts, the idiots, right? And I think as car enthusiasts, we can compare this to like the whole sideshow craze, where none of the people that are at a sideshow or participating in a sideshow are actual car people.
They don't want to have anything to do with cars.
Right. And we hate the sideshow people because they give car enthusiasts a bad name and a bad rep. Now these individuals are starting to infiltrate or get involved with car meets, car shows, whatever else, and they're ruining it for everyone. Now there are these shows that will no longer exist. The shows that I grew up in high school watching videos and dreaming about, I would love to take a trip with my friends to go and see and be with that community and really feel what that's like. And I no longer have that opportunity because of the decisions of just idiot kids that in my mind are the watered down populist version in the car culture that actually don't care about curating or protecting or growing the car community in positive ways.
Yeah, and to avoid sounding like curmudgeons who are just against the way things are developing, right? Let's look at this from another perspective. Where is there to be gain had here, right? Obviously, money comes into the equation. Anytime you have something that gets popular like this, there's those that want to capitalize on it. So corporate interests beyond those of just individual influencers, we're talking about entire brands, entire companies that see an opportunity to exploit something and to get involved with it by kind of affiliating with it that same way. And then what happens? Now what used to be this nice organic event with a bunch of people who are just sort of hardcore enthusiasts about a thing are now being pitched to. There are advertisers, there are sponsors, there are underwriters, there are brands and names of things that aren't really there because people care so much about this topic, but rather because they're the ones who are injecting money into it to get their name out there to take advantage of that group of people who are showing interest. And sometimes they're intelligent, right? You'll see, oh, this insurance company is advertising at this car meet because they want people to have awareness or good feelings about this insurance company because they're coming out to show their cars. But at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself, what is their actual interest here? Why would they want you to have any affiliation with their company so that you can spend your hard-earned money with them? Because you're going to have a warm, fuzzy feeling in your heart about that company name because, oh yeah, weren't they the ones sponsoring that car meet I went to? So they must really be interested in and enthusiastic about the direction of cars. They can't possibly be there because they're just hoovering up all the data around all the individuals and all the cars that are out there in the market because it serves their interests as a corporate entity, as an insurance company whose exact business is to take your money and not have to pay it back to you. So what do you do in that case? Well, we want these sponsors because they're helping to prop up these events and help make them bigger. But at the same time, are they helping to actually further the goals we have with these events? Is making them bigger or more prominent actually accomplishing what we want? And I think in a lot of cases, the answer is absolutely not.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point there. An example here locally that I personally experienced on that Cars and Coffee front, not something that got way out of hand like what happened in Gatlinburg, but the Novato Cars and Coffee that happens here locally. I remember when that show was relatively small, like people would show up for it, and being around Marin County, you usually got a pretty good turnout of a mixture of exotics, modified cars, classics. It was a really, really cool Cars and Coffee and was the Cars and Coffee to go to. Obviously, as word gets out, it starts to get bigger and bigger, and you get more excited because you get to see more cars. So you get that self-benefit of, oh, there's more people here, more to see, more individuals to connect with. Maybe there's going to be more of cars that are like mine, and I can meet those owners, and it's all really good stuff. Now, as it continues to get bigger, then all of a sudden, it was like the biggest Cars and Coffee. Right. Now, it's a little bit more challenging to find parking spaces. You have to show up early. Now it's not as convenient for individuals to go to. And as it grew in popularity, then you started seeing individuals showing up to like promote something.
Right.
And it's like, well, this is kind of taking away from my experience. Now the Tesla dealer's here with a Cybertruck taking up 3 parking spaces because they want to try to sell something to someone. Like, are you kidding me? Or then there's those groups that like want to like claim stake on parking spaces of, oh no, I'm reserving this spot. And it's like, well, that's not what this used to be about. And It gets to the point that you can kind of see, well, now people aren't going to go to the Novato Cars and Coffee because there's all these headaches. There's someone trying to sell me something. There's people taking it too seriously. Screw this. Like, I'm going to move on to the next thing or go find whatever niche group is going to better suit me within the car community. So I think that this trend that's occurring, it's becoming trendy, and things that become trendy die out and people move on to the next best thing. And I think right now we're experiencing a car culture bubble. The car community bubble. I think that there's a lot of pressure and it's becoming oversaturated, over-popularized, overhyped in a lot of ways. And there's going to need to be this releasing of pressure on the tail end. And I think that we're going to experience kind of almost a downfall of car culture. We've seen it already. Shows are getting canceled. The communities are not putting up with cars as much as they used to be. I mean, we're thinking about here in California, there could even be political movements to start removing combustion engine cars from the roadways. And I think we need to be careful as a community in how we move forward and how we present ourselves to ensure that those of us that truly do care about cars and just love driving and love being about these automobiles, that we can still have that opportunity to express that passion in the future. Transitioning back to that conversation of the influencers, the social medias, the YouTubers of the world, it puts them in a position that their audience has now grown, right? The audience for automotive culture has grown phenomenally, and it pushes them to that limit of having to do outrageous things with vehicles because, unfortunately, that is what gets clicks. That is what gets views, doing more and more outrageous things. Now, unfortunately, all of that is at the detriment for the community in which they're operating with.
Right.
It's not good for the car community because, doing all these outrageous things, at the end of the day, at some point is going to catch up with you, and society, meaning the government, local authorities, whatever the case is going to have to put their foot down and be like, all of these stupid kids on YouTube that are trying to do crazy stuff with GT3s, RSs, or whatever on public roads. It needs to come to an end. And unfortunately, that ripple effect that that's going to have through the community is it's going to paint all of us as criminals. And we're not that, right? But unfortunately, in the public eye, that is going to be the thing that's going to be representative of us all, is the craziness that's out there. And unfortunately, whenever the authorities get involved, they have to take a pretty wide swing at the entire group to try to calm stuff down. So I think it's kind of an unfortunate state that we're in, is that you have these influencers that are making a boatload of money off of the car community because it's grown so large and it's become such a large audience. But the things in which they're doing to make money off that community is detrimental to the community itself.
There's always that set of bad actors that'll always stand out outside the main group of the population, and they get attention for often not good things. And I think that's a lot of what we see here, to the point where we have entire communities painted with that broad brush of those few bad actors because that's what gets the attention, the media coverage, etc. We see that happening in the drifting community all over the place, where people who drift cars aren't inherently any different than people who are into other kinds of activities with cars. But what we've seen is the fact that there are people who show up and don't know how to behave or act in ways that are antisocial, that have affiliated with events happening where there are drifters. And what happens is that racetracks and organizers paint things with a broad brush sometimes, and they say, oh, well, that's not the kind of traffic, or those aren't the kind of patrons we want coming to our events, so we're going to just stop doing that. And the entire car culture suffers because of the fact that some bad actors were out there and somehow getting grouped together with this other set of people who are just enthusiasts for a way to use a car or a kind of car. It just doesn't make sense.
That's internal conflict within the car community of talking about a racetrack painting a car group in a certain pic. This is not even like what you're talking about, which is 100% real and has been happening here locally. That's not even like the common folk looking at a group of people being like, oh, they're bad apples. That is people within the car community,
in the industry,
operating racetracks, painting a picture and being like, oh, those are just the sideshow kids, that drifters aren't their own legitimate group of people. They've correlated it with, the criminals and the people doing illegal activities out there on the street of like, oh yeah, that's that group of car people. And it's like, we're getting into a very dangerous place that I think that there are going to be a handful of steps backwards in regards to the accessibility and openness to use your vehicle and enjoy your car as an enthusiast. I think that there's going to be a lot of shifts within communities and maybe even like bigger crackdowns on, police enforcing, oh, your ride height isn't high enough, or you have too much camber, or your car's modified more than it needs to be. And like an increase of state refereeing where, they could be looking at vehicles and be like, nope, you can't modify your car anymore, just like we've seen over in Europe of how strict the TÜV is over in Germany of like your wheels have to be approved. That's why BBS is so popular over in Europe, is because they manufacture their aftermarket wheels to a higher standard.
Right.
Where here in America, you can get away with throwing on Chinese knockoff wheels that are going to explode if they experience more than 5 Gs of force, but the DOT is not going to like step in all that much. So, I think that we can see within American car culture a big shift. And unfortunately, in a way, I kind of think it's justified in regards to the actions that we've seen, that because the bad apples of the group have been so prominent for so long and been able to get away with so much and ruined so much, that I can kind of see the justification of that swing. And it's unfortunate that there's going to be so many of us that have been car enthusiasts for so long that are going to have to pay the price for what those individuals have done.
They are following the trends. It's rational to do so, but you have to ask yourself what the effect of that is. We just went to the F1 race here, the United States Grand Prix at Circuit of the Americas, which was one of the most well-attended US GPs that's ever occurred. There were more people at this race than they anticipated. They didn't predict anything like it because Formula One and the sport of motorsports has become so popular in broader culture. So a lot of people show up. Now, I'm not going to argue that a bunch of enthusiasts couldn't get into the race because all these other people showed up, but it sure did increase the average ticket price. It sure did make it a lot harder to get physical access to the areas closer to the racetrack and the race cars, which is something that the hardcore enthusiasts are there to do, and are being crowded out by the thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of other people who are there for the festival to go out in the sun, drink beer, and have a good time. Nothing wrong with that, but they're not there for motorsports. They're there for the event. They're there for the Coachella. They're there for the festival atmosphere of that. They're not there to actually be involved in the details of what's happening. And so it makes me sort of step back and say, okay, I need to make sure I'm not becoming sort of like old and hardened and just closed down to what could happen. So I have to ask the question, like, is there any hope for the future? And I want to say there is. If I think about it, how we used to talk about these things, even just a decade ago, kind of when I was first starting to get into racing myself, showing up at the racetrack and having some, bench racing chat with my colleagues around, like, where we think the direction of this thing is going. And, hey, we're here and there's a racing school at this racetrack. And, man, there don't seem like there's many racing schools anymore. What's going to be the future of this? And literally just 10 years ago, we were talking about how this entire sport and activity is going away. It's dying because we don't see any young people coming out and showing up to make racing schools successful. We don't see people coming out to the racetrack just to have an experience on their own or with their families. That was sort of starting to go away 10 years ago. And what happened in the intervening time is that influencers and this sort of media side of things exploded to the point where nobody's saying there aren't enough new people coming into the market to make this thing popular. It's just the opposite. There's so many people coming into the market to make this thing popular. They're sort of strangling it and starving the rest of us for air because there's too many of us in this room. And we can't all express our individual opinions. We can't have individual opinions because everything gets painted in this broad brush sort of consumer way to make it bigger and bigger. And that's sort of what we chase after, right? In America, in the US, bigger is better, right? That's how we think of things. And if you're a company, being successful is no longer good enough. You have to demonstrate growth. Every single quarter over quarter, you can be a corporation making tens of billions of dollars a quarter, and yet you're laying people off because that's the only way to sustain growth. And I think all these things sort of trickle back down to motorsports as a culture as we see it. As it's gotten to be so big, there's some point at which there's going to be a correction. This continued growth for growth's sake will stop because there won't be any more money to make. There won't be any more consumers to capture. There won't be any more market share to have because it's already mainstream. And we've already gotten everybody who watches Netflix watching Formula One. We've gotten already everybody who goes out to the movies to go see stuff watching the F1 movie. Where do you go from there? There is a point at which the growth will diminish. It will cease. And at some point, there'll be a contraction and a correction. So what does that look like when all these people who have kind of glommed onto motorsports and cars find something else more interesting or sexy to get involved with? And then what happens to this space where the enthusiasts maybe are able to hold on all that while, or maybe they're kind of losing interest too and they move on to other things? I don't know. I mean, there's a sense of me that says people will get bored of this too.
No, I totally agree with you that at some point, people are going to become uninterested, right? The casual fan, the casual car enthusiast, at some point will move on to the next thing, as happens in anything that is trendy. I guess my biggest hope of going on this large rant, I feel a lot better of expressing my emotions about this now.
This was quite cathartic, I got to say.
Right. But having this large rant, I think my biggest wish and hope is that as those people start to turn away from cars and it isn't as trendy as it used to be, that there isn't a lot of destruction. And I think that's the biggest concern that I have right now is that I'm starting to see things being destroyed within the car community, mainly the meets and the gatherings and how car people in general are being painted in the media and how things are getting out. And so, yes, these people are going to move on eventually, and I just hope that they don't leave behind wreckage and that there isn't a lot of things that get taken away, because I think in the back of my head there's always been that fear of if governments want to be tyrannical, they can just dictate of you can no longer drive combustion engines on the road, or they're going to make owning an internal combustion engine so expensive. They're going to put a tax on gasoline that's so high that people can no longer afford to drive these cars. And I don't think that we need to give them any more reasons to accelerate that process of looking of see all these people that really love cars. They're dangerous to our communities and they're putting people's lives at risk. And it doesn't need to be that way. And so I don't want people listening to this episode to be like, oh, he's just telling people, get off my driveway. It's no. Everyone's welcome on the driveway. as long as you're being respectful. Don't do burnouts on my driveway. Don't do donuts on my driveway. This is an analogy of get off my lawn. Hopefully we're understanding that.
Shaking fist at sky.
But just being respectful, right? And as this crowd is coming in, it is difficult to control an influx of people, to control everyone's habits, behaviors, the way that they conduct themselves at car meets, car events, or just out there on the street, right? But as a real car enthusiast, if you truly care about this community and the future of being a car enthusiast, you need to be able to speak up against those individuals that are absolutely just acting a fool of, hey, that's not what this is about, or shutting that stuff down, helping. Also being an individual that doesn't fall into or become victim of, oh yeah, I need to do stupid stuff to show off on the internet. Don't be that person. Understand that that can take away from the thing that you love, we love.
I'm hopeful for that correction. The fact that real world experiences and physical media are becoming popular again.
Yeah.
That people are realizing the difference between what it means to go take a picture on your iPhone at an event and actually to be there paying attention during it. Those are not the same thing. And I think there's an increasing number of people who are starting to sense that. So there is hope here. It's hard when it's so channeled by the corporate interests, the financial interests that sort of drive the markets and the industry. But I think it also, that sort of gives fuel, if you will, no pun intended, to the hardcore enthusiasts who are out there who see that stuff, who have to continue to do things and find creative ways to sort of express themselves and have that unique point of view that is different than what everything else that's being spoon-fed to them. And there's part of me that has the hope because, for everything else is like this, kind of wait a generation, because kids automatically hate what their parents like. So if there's enough people out there today who are just kind of glomming on to this and taking advantage of a thing that was more of a niche thing previously, just wait a little while. And maybe it's that next set of people coming up, the next set of kids who are going to have a different appreciation and a different level of engagement with cars and motorsports. Maybe they'll be the future of this and they'll be able to see things that are not visible to us because we're sort of blinded by the showcase and the spectacle of the big event and the fancy brand and affiliating with the big name person and wanting somehow to get a like from them and to feel like we're somehow better as humans because they thought well of the thing we took a picture of when they put a picture out. None of that has any actual value, certainly not as human beings. And so I'm hopeful that there's that next group of people coming up. They're going to see that, they're going to call BS on it, that they're going to take things in a different direction and bring some authenticity back to it.
Yeah, I think there is going to be a shift in car culture in the next 5 years. It's going to go down. I just hope that it just releases a little bit and it doesn't completely destroy itself in the process, because I'd like to have cars around. I'd still like to have the car community exist, and over the next handful of years that's not something that gets taken away from any of us.
In a way, the exclusivity was sort of a feature. So I think there's got to be that correction, and I'm just hopeful that whatever occurs doesn't take what joy we get from this, that doesn't take the attributes of the freedom of being in a car and being able to drive wherever you want to drive and expressing yourself uniquely through your car, the mods you make to your car, the way you choose to sort of showcase who you are as a person through this thing that you have a lot of passion for and this area of interest of yourself. That's where I'm hopeful, and I'll keep some cautious optimism reserved for that future. That's where I want to see things go. So I'm going to put that out there into the universe.
Putting out some good energy, which is good. So I think we released our internal angst in regards to this topic well enough.
I feel better now. How about you?
Oh, I feel excellent.
I hope if you're listening, you feel better about this too, because there is a future and we're all part of that. And it's up to us to decide what car culture is. If you're paying attention to this podcast, you are part of car culture. You're not out there doing it just to show other people. So we need more of that.
Absolutely, 100%. So to all the listeners out there, thanks for listening. This has been Cold Start.
Thanks, Sylas.
Thanks, Todd.